A poor mechanic, a broken-down car, and a woman who wasn't what she seemed. Jake Walker never asked for much, just an honest day's work at his small-town garage and enough money to keep the lights on. But when he stops to help a stranded driver on the side of the road, he has no idea that the woman behind the wheel is Sienna Graves, a billionaire heir hiding a secret. Sienna wasn't just lost on the highway. She was searching for something far more important, something money couldn't buy, a man who would love her for who she was, not what she owned. And Jake. He might just be the one person who could show her what truly mattered. But when their worlds collide, will love be enough to overcome the lies, the secrets, and the impossible differences between them? Stay with us until the end, because this is a story of fate, love, and the biggest risk of all, trusting someone with your heart. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The night air was thick with the scent of gasoline and engine grease, the comforting aroma of long hours and honest work. Jake Walker wiped his hands on a rag, exhaustion pulling at his muscles, but the job wasn't done yet. It never really was. The dim glow from the flickering garage sign cast long shadows over the cracked pavement as he locked up, rolling his shoulders. That's when he saw it. A car. A damn expensive one, sitting on the side of the road just past the flickering streetlight. Its hazard lights blinked against the darkness like a silent distress call. He frowned. A car like that had no business being in this part of town, especially this late at night. At first, he considered driving past. He had enough on his plate. The bills weren't paying themselves, and tomorrow promised another long day at the garage. But then he caught sight of the figure standing beside it, arms wrapped around herself, pacing slightly on the shoulder of the road. Something about the way she stood, tense, vulnerable, made him change his mind. Pulling up beside her, he rolled down his window. "Need some help?" The woman turned sharply, her gaze locking onto his. Even in the dim light, he could tell she wasn't from around here. Her coat was too perfect, her posture too refined. But her face, frustration edged her features, a kind of raw irritation that made her seem more real than her tailored clothes. "I called roadside assistance," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face, the movement sharp. "They said it'll be over an hour." Jake glanced at the car, a McLaren. He let out a low whistle. "Damn, that's a lot of car to be stranded out here." She exhaled, rubbing her arms against the night chill. "Tell me about it." He hesitated. Women like her, rich, put together, the kind that probably sipped cocktails in high-rise lounges, usually weren't the trusting type. He wasn't either. But she was stuck, and he knew a thing or two about feeling like the world had left you on the side of the road. "I can take a look," he offered. "Might save you the wait." She hesitated. A flicker of something crossed her face, uncertainty, maybe a hint of suspicion. The expensive car, the late hour, a stranger offering to help. Then, after a beat, she sighed, stepping back. "Fine. But if you make it worse, I'm holding you responsible." Jake smirked, stepping out of his truck. "Fair enough." Popping the hood, he grabbed a flashlight from his pocket, the beam slicing through the darkness. The engine was still warm, ticking softly. He scanned the mechanics, fingers moving instinctively through wires and components. "Battery's fine. It's not the alternator either," he murmured, mostly to himself. He glanced at her. "Did it die on you all of a sudden?" She nodded, wrapping her arms tighter around herself. "1 second it was fine. Next thing I know, I lost power, and now it won't start." He exhaled, tapping a wrench against his palm. Fuel pump failure, a bad one. He could fix it, but it wasn't going to be a quick job. "You're going to need a tow," he admitted, "or I can get it running well enough to get you somewhere safer." She let out a groan, rubbing her temples. "Great, just what I needed tonight." Something in her voice made him pause, not just frustration, something else. He glanced at her again, really looked this time, the exhaustion, the way she shifted her weight, like she was carrying something heavier than just a broken-down car. "Rough night?" he asked, voice even. She gave a short laugh, but it didn't reach her eyes. Something like that. He could relate. "All right," he said finally, rolling up his sleeves. "Give me a few minutes." Again that flicker of hesitation. Then she nodded. Jake got to work, hands moving with ease, the way they always did when he was fixing something. The night stretched quiet around them, the distant hum of the highway, the only sound. She didn't ask for his name. He didn't ask for hers. But something about this moment, this random chance encounter, felt like the start of something neither of them could quite name yet. The night air pressed in around them, thick with the scent of cooling asphalt and engine grease. Jake knelt beside the McLaren, sleeves pushed up, grease-stained hands working with practiced ease. The soft clicks of his tools against the metal were the only sounds between them. Sienna stood a few feet away, arms crossed, eyes locked onto him, not in admiration, not in gratitude, in scrutiny. Men had always been predictable around her. Some tried too hard to impress her, bragging about their success, their ambition. Others acted indifferent, only to circle back when they found out who she was. And then there were the ones who saw her as nothing more than a payday, a woman with a bottomless wallet meant to be taken advantage of. Jake, so far, wasn't fitting into any of those categories. He worked without small talk, without asking personal questions, without so much as glancing up at her except when he needed to. His focus was entirely on the car. That alone made him different. "You know, I don't usually break down on the side of the road," she said, tilting her head. Jake didn't look up. "Yeah, I don't usually fix McLarens in the dark, so I guess we're both out of our element." Sienna smirked at the way his voice carried that dry, rough-around-the-edges kind of humor, like he wasn't trying to entertain her. He was just being himself. That was rare. The hum of the engine changed slightly as he adjusted something under the hood. He gave it a few testing revs, then wiped his hands on a rag, standing up. "Fuel pump failure," he said, eyes scanning the sleek frame of the car like it was any other vehicle, not a machine worth more than some houses. "It's not completely shot, but it'll happen again if you don't get it replaced soon." She raised a brow. "And how long until that happens?" "Could be a week, could be tomorrow," he shrugged, "but I can get it running well enough to get you where you need to go." Sienna hesitated, the weight of his words pressing against the weight of her own thoughts. She was supposed to be meeting someone tonight, someone who thought he was evaluating her, when in reality she had been the one evaluating him. Now, that would have to wait. She reached into her coat, pulling out a sleek black wallet, her fingers slipping over a crisp $100 bill. Jake barely gave it a glance. "How much do I owe you?" she asked, voice smooth, neutral. He exhaled, shaking his head as he reached for his toolbox instead. "Nothing." That threw her off. She frowned. "Nothing?" Jake wiped the back of his hand across his jaw, his sharp blue eyes finally meeting hers in the dim glow of the streetlight. "Didn't take much, just a little time." Sienna held the bill between her fingers, a silent offer. "Still, I insist," he snorted, pushing the hood down with a firm click. "Look, lady, I fix cars. That's what I do. Doesn't mean I charge for every good deed. Just pay it forward." That stopped her. She had spent years in boardrooms, in exclusive clubs, in places where nothing came without a price tag, where everyone was keeping score, where generosity always had an angle. She had never once met someone who turned down free money. Her fingers curled around the bill, gripping it tighter as she studied him. Was this some kind of game? Was he just acting selfless to impress her? Or was he actually genuine? Jake stepped back, already moving toward his truck, like this was just another Tuesday for him, like helping a stranded stranger wasn't something that warranted attention. Sienna slipped the $100 back into her wallet, but her curiosity had already been sparked. Nobody turned down money. Nobody. She glanced at Jake one last time as he climbed into his truck, headlights flashing across her face as he pulled away. Maybe he really was different, or maybe he was just better at pretending. The engine purred back to life, smooth and effortless, as if it had never broken down in the first place. Jake closed the hood, giving it a firm pat, then wiped the last traces of grease off his hands. Sienna watched him, waiting for something, anything. A comment, a knowing smirk, even a glance that acknowledged she was more than just some woman with car trouble. But there was nothing. "Should be good to go," he said, stepping back. "Like I said, you'll need to replace that fuel pump soon, but you'll make it into town without a problem." Sienna hesitated, shifting slightly on her feet. "Right. Well, thanks." Jake nodded, already moving towards his truck. She blinked. That was it? There was no hesitation, no lingering gaze, no subtle attempt to stretch this moment out. He wasn't asking for her number. He wasn't trying to charm her. He wasn't even acting remotely interested in who she was. She wasn't used to that. She had spent her life being seen. Men always looked twice, always leaned in a little too close, always found an excuse to extend a conversation. They either wanted something from her or wanted to impress her. Either way, their intentions were always clear. But Jake? Jake was already climbing into his truck like she was nothing more than a stranger he happened to help on the side of the road. She didn't like that. Wait. The word left her mouth before she even knew why she was saying it. Jake paused, one boot on the truck step, one hand on the wheel. He glanced over at her, expectant, but not intrigued. "Yeah?" Sienna opened her mouth, but no words came out. She had nothing to say, nothing necessary. She could ask for his name. She could stretch the conversation, drop a hint that she was curious about him. But she didn't want to give herself away, so instead she cleared her throat. "Which way to town?" Jake smirked slightly, like maybe he knew she was grasping for a reason to keep him here, but he didn't call her out on it. He just turned slightly, nodding toward the highway. "Head straight for about 15 minutes, then take the first exit. You'll see signs for the main strip. Gas station on the left, motel on the right." He didn't offer to follow her there, didn't check to make sure she'd be okay. She gripped the steering wheel. "Got it." Jake gave her a two-fingered wave, then slammed his truck door shut. A second later, his headlights flickered on, illuminating the road ahead, and then, just like that, he was gone. Sienna sat in her car, unmoving, her fingers tightening around the leather steering wheel. Unseen. It wasn't that she needed the attention. She didn't even like when men tried too hard. But something about the way Jake had left so effortlessly, so completely unbothered, itched at her. Who the hell was he? A mechanic in a nowhere town, living paycheck to paycheck, the kind of guy who shouldn't have the luxury of indifference. And yet, somehow, he did. She exhaled sharply, pressing her foot on the gas, the car surging forward onto the open road. Jake might have left, but something about this night, about him, wasn't done with her yet. The city lights stretched endlessly outside the penthouse window, a skyline of power and excess. But Sienna Graves barely noticed. She swirled the amber liquid in her glass, her mind 1,000 miles away. She should be in New York by now, should be at the investors' dinner, shaking hands with men twice her age who pretended to respect her while secretly doubting her every move. Instead, she was here, in a rented suite in a town no one had ever heard of, thinking about a man who had walked away without a second glance. "Are you sure about this?" Sienna turned toward the voice. Margot, her assistant, stood near the desk, arms crossed, an eyebrow raised in suspicion. "You said we were heading back tomorrow," Margot continued. "You've got 3 meetings waiting, and the foundation gala is on Saturday." Sienna exhaled. "Push the meetings." Margot blinked. "Excuse me? I'm staying." There was a beat of silence. Sienna didn't have to explain herself. People in her world didn't ask questions, not unless they wanted to be replaced. But Margot wasn't just anyone. She had been with Sienna long enough to know when something was off. "This isn't like you," Margot said slowly. "You don't just cancel business trips for—" She narrowed her eyes. "Wait, this is about that guy, isn't it?" Sienna didn't answer. Margot groaned, rubbing her temples. "Please tell me you're not doing what I think you're doing." Sienna set her glass down, gaze sharp. "I want to see something." "Oh, I know exactly what you want to see. You want to know if he's different, if he's the one person who doesn't care about money." Margot's voice was laced with sarcasm. "And what happens when he finds out who you really are? Have we considered that part yet?" Sienna turned back toward the window, her reflection staring back at her. "No one's ever turned down my money before," she murmured. Margot rolled her eyes. "Maybe he's just a good guy. Maybe he doesn't want anything from you." "Maybe," Sienna said. But the truth was, she didn't believe in maybe. She had met too many men who wore the mask of humility, who swore they didn't care about status, until the moment they realized what being with her really meant. She had trusted before. She wouldn't make that mistake again. "I need to know," Sienna said, voice steady now. "If he's real, Margot. Or if he's just better at playing the game." Margot let out a slow breath. "And how exactly do you plan to test him?" Sienna's lips curved into the kind of smile that had sent entire boardrooms into a panic. "I'll think of something." The bell over the garage door jingled, cutting through the steady hum of an old engine idling in the bay. Jake didn't look up at first. His hands were deep under the hood of a pickup, his mind focused on the rhythmic clanking of metal, the way the machine breathed under his touch. Then he heard her voice. "Looks like I'm back sooner than expected." His wrench stilled. Straightening, he wiped his hands on a grease-stained rag before turning around. And there she was, Sienna, standing in the middle of his shop, like she belonged there, like she hadn't just been a fleeting moment on a dark road last night. Jake arched a brow. "Something tells me you didn't take my advice about getting that fuel pump replaced." She smiled, all practiced ease, but there was something beneath it, something unreadable. "I figured I'd get a second opinion." Jake exhaled, tossing the rag onto the workbench. "You didn't have to drive all the way back here for that." "I was in the neighborhood," she said, casually glancing around. The garage was nothing special. Concrete floors, faded toolboxes, walls lined with shelves stacked with car parts and half-empty oil cans. A far cry from whatever sleek, air-conditioned auto shop she was probably used to. But she didn't seem out of place. She looked curious. He leaned against the workbench, crossing his arms. "Right. You just happen to be passing through a town that's 20 miles off the highway." Sienna shrugged. Lucky coincidence. Jake didn't believe in coincidences. But he wasn't the type to dig for answers that weren't his to have. If she wanted to be here, fine. But he had a job to do. He jerked his chin toward her car, parked just outside. "Pop the hood. Let's see if this thing's still giving you trouble." She watched as he got to work, the same way she had the night before, except now she was paying attention to more than just his hands. She was watching him, the way he moved, the way he muttered under his breath when something didn't line up the way he wanted, the way his jaw tensed in concentration, his fingers running along the engine like he could feel what was wrong before he even saw it. "You really love this, don't you?" she asked suddenly. Jake didn't look up. "What, fixing things?" She nodded. He shrugged, adjusting something near the radiator. "Yeah, guess I do." Most men would have taken the opportunity to talk themselves up, to spin some story about how cars were their passion, about how they could take apart an engine blindfolded. But Jake? He didn't brag, didn't act like he was doing anything special. He just was. Sienna leaned against the car, crossing her arms. "So how'd you end up here? Small-town mechanic with a garage that looks like it's been around forever?" Jake let out a low chuckle. "It has been. I worked here when I was a kid, learned everything from the old man who owned it before me." She tilted her head. "And now it's yours?" "Not yet." His voice had a weight to it. He closed the hood, wiping his hands again. "But maybe one day." Sienna studied him, taking in the calm certainty in his voice. He wasn't chasing success. He wasn't desperate for more. And that was the part that fascinated her the most. She had spent her life around men who wanted everything. More power, more money, more control. Jake just wanted enough. And for the first time, Sienna wasn't sure if she was testing him or if he was testing her. Jake wiped his hands on his rag, the scent of oil and steel clinging to the air between them. The garage felt quieter than before, though the hum of machines still lingered in the background. Sienna stood a few feet away, her arms folded, watching him with an expression he couldn't quite place. She knew she had to say something, knew that this moment, this pause, was where the truth should come out. But it didn't, because if she told him who she really was, Sienna Graves, heir to the Graves fortune, CEO of one of the largest tech conglomerates in the country, the dynamic between them would shift, and she wasn't ready for that. She wanted to see if Jake looked at her the same way without the power attached to her name, just for a little while. So, when he finally met her gaze, expectant but unpressing, she smiled slightly and said, "Just Sienna." Jake tilted his head like he was waiting for more, a last name maybe, a hint at who she really was. But when she didn't offer anything else, he only nodded. "All right, just Sienna. You sticking around, or do I need to fix this car again tomorrow?" She smirked, the easy confidence in his voice unsettling her in a way she didn't expect. "Depends. You overcharging me for labor?" His eyes glinted with something unreadable. "If I was overcharging, I would have taken your $100 last night." He wasn't stupid. She could tell he knew something was off. Most people would have asked what a woman like her was doing in a place like this, why she had no last name, no real explanation. Jake didn't. Instead, he just went back to what he was doing, like her presence here wasn't a mystery that needed solving. It unnerved her. People always wanted to know. They dug, pried, found ways to connect her to her family name, like it meant something about who she was. Jake just fixed cars, and somehow that made her want to stay. She leaned against the counter, watching as he sorted through his tools, the way his hands moved with practiced ease. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked suddenly. Jake glanced at her. "Leaving what?" "This town. The garage. Doing something bigger?" For the first time, his expression shifted. Not angry, not defensive, but something close. "I don't need bigger," he said simply. "I like my life the way it is." Sienna swallowed. That answer shouldn't have surprised her. But it did. Because she had never met a man who was satisfied with what he had. And maybe, just maybe, that scared her more than she wanted to admit. The days passed, and somehow she kept finding reasons to stay. Sienna had told herself it was temporary, that she was just curious, that once she figured Jake out, once she confirmed he was just like every other man who eventually wanted something, she would leave. But she hadn't left. She told him she was passing through, and somehow she kept passing through, again and again. The first time she stopped by the garage with a half-baked excuse about her car making a weird noise. Jake had checked it, raising an eyebrow when he found nothing wrong. But he hadn't questioned her, hadn't pushed for a reason why she was still here. The second time, she had bumped into him at a diner on the edge of town, the kind of place with faded red booths and black coffee that tasted like burnt earth. He had been sitting at the counter, nursing a cup of it, flipping through an old car magazine. She had lingered near the door for a second too long, considering leaving, until he glanced up and smirked. "Well, look at that. Just Sienna, still in town. What are the odds?" She didn't leave after that. And now this town, this quiet, small-life existence, was starting to wrap itself around her. She sat across from Jake in that same diner, her fingers wrapped around a cup of coffee. It wasn't expensive, handcrafted espresso. It wasn't topped with foamed milk or served in porcelain, but it was real. So was the way Jake leaned back in his seat, rolling his shoulders after a long day at the garage. The way his eyes softened slightly when she asked about his work. She had never known a man who worked like this, not because he had to, not because he was chasing some never-ending ambition, but because he simply loved what he did. She wanted to understand it. "So," she said, resting her chin on her hand, "why cars?" Jake took a slow sip of his coffee before answering. "Because they make sense." Sienna raised an eyebrow. "How so?" He set his mug down, fingers drumming lightly on the worn tabletop. "You put in the work, they give you something back. You fix what's broken and they run. There's no politics, no games, just results." She swallowed. It was such a simple answer, but something about it twisted inside her. Her world had been nothing but games, a constant battle of power, money, and people who said one thing but meant another. Maybe that's why she kept coming back, because Jake wasn't a game. He was just Jake. And for the first time in her life, she didn't want to leave. The night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of gasoline and rain-soaked pavement. They sat on the hood of Jake's truck parked just outside the garage, the neon glow from a nearby street lamp casting long shadows. The town had gone quiet, the kind of stillness that only existed in places where people went to bed early and life wasn't rushing toward some unseen finish line. Sienna pulled her jacket tighter around her, staring up at the stars. They were brighter here, unobstructed by the glare of city lights. She exhaled. You ever feel like you were meant for something bigger? Jake was silent for a moment, his hands resting on his knees. Bigger than what? She turned to him. This, the garage, the town, the same people, the same routine. Jake smirked slightly, shaking his head. You say that like it's a bad thing. Sienna let out a quiet laugh, but there was something hollow about it. It's not bad. It's just small. Jake tilted his head, studying her. And what exactly are you running from? Her breath caught, but she masked it with a sip of the soda can balanced beside her. He saw too much. I'm not running, she said too quickly. Jake didn't push. He just nodded, like he knew better than to press for answers she wasn't ready to give. Instead, he leaned back against the windshield, exhaling slow. You want to know something funny? He said. I used to think the same way, that I had to get out, do something bigger, make something of myself. Sienna turned toward him, surprised. And? Jake shrugged. And then I realized I don't need more. I just need enough. Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't respond right away. She didn't understand that, not yet, because in her world there was never enough. No matter how much money, power, or success you had, there was always someone with more. But Jake didn't care about any of that. He didn't try to impress her, didn't treat her like someone he had to win over. And somewhere, in all the quiet, all the spaces between words, something started to shift. She could feel it in the way his eyes lingered just a little longer, the way her heart picked up when he laughed at something she said, the way the air between them felt charged with something unspoken. She didn't know what to do with that. But she knew one thing. She wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. The weight of the lie settled deeper in her chest with every passing day. Sienna sat in the corner booth of the diner, fingers wrapped around a half-empty coffee cup, barely noticing the hum of conversation around her. Across from her, Jake sat back against the worn leather seat, arms folded, watching her with quiet curiosity. You're quiet tonight, he said. She forced a small smile. Just thinking. Jake raised an eyebrow. Dangerous habit. She huffed a small laugh, but it didn't reach her eyes. If only he knew, every time she looked at him, really looked at him, she felt it. The guilt. The growing, gnawing truth that she was playing a game he never agreed to. Jake had opened up to her. He had told her about his life, his struggles, the weight of keeping the garage running on a threadbare budget. He had let her into his world without hesitation, without suspicion, because he trusted her. And she was lying to him. She wasn't just Sienna. She was Sienna Graves, a billionaire, an executive, a woman who could buy the entire town if she wanted to. And yet she sat here pretending to be someone simpler, someone smaller. Jake leaned forward, studying her. You know, for someone who says they're just passing through, you've been around a while. Her stomach twisted. Yeah? Guess I have. Not that I'm complaining, he added quickly, his smirk softening the words. Just noticing. She swallowed, heart hammering against her ribs. Tell him, just say it. Tell him who you are. Let the chips fall where they may. But then, that tiny voice in the back of her head whispered, what if he walks away? Jake was different. She knew that now. But she had seen how men changed when money was involved, how admiration turned to calculation, and she wasn't ready to see that look in his eyes. So instead, she forced another smile, hiding behind the lie for just a little longer. Guess I like it here. Jake nodded, satisfied. And just like that, the moment passed, but the guilt stayed. The sound of metal clanking against metal echoed through the garage as Jake tightened the last bolt under the hood. The afternoon heat had settled heavy over the shop, dust hanging in the air, the scent of oil thick. He wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, stepping away just as a familiar voice cut through the silence. "So, you gonna pretend like none of this is weird?" Jake sighed before turning around. Eli. His best friend leaned against the tool bench, arms crossed, watching him with that knowing look that always meant trouble. Jake grabbed a rag, wiping his hands. "Not in the mood, man." Eli smirked, but there was something sharper behind it. "Didn't ask if you were. I asked if you're going to keep acting like you don't see what's right in front of you." Jake tossed the rag aside. "And what exactly is that?" Eli let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. "Come on, man. This girl, Sienna, she just happens to break down in the middle of nowhere, then sticks around for weeks like she's got nowhere better to be." He leaned in. "You ever ask yourself why?" Jake tensed. He had asked himself that more than once. But every time the thought crept in, every time doubt tried to take root, he shoved it aside. Because when he was with her, it felt real. "She's different," Jake said finally. Eli scoffed. "Yeah, that's the damn problem. She ain't like us. You don't just end up in this town, Jake, and you sure as hell don't stay unless you got a reason." Jake clenched his jaw. He didn't want to do this. Didn't want to pick apart something that felt good just because it didn't make sense on paper. Eli pushed off the workbench, shaking his head. "Look, I'm not saying she's bad news. I'm saying you don't know what game you're playing, and if you ain't careful, you're going to end up the one getting hurt." Jake stayed silent, but something about those words burrowed deep. Because what if Eli was right? The evening air carried the scent of grilled food and cheap beer as laughter spilled from the outdoor patio of O'Reilly's, the town's only decent bar. The place was livelier than usual, a mix of locals and out-of-towners passing through on their way to bigger, shinier destinations. Jake sat at the bar, nursing a whiskey, pretending he wasn't watching her. Sienna. She was standing near the patio railing, a glass of wine in hand, listening to some guy talk. A guy who clearly didn't belong here. He was the kind Jake recognized instantly. A suit. Even in his casual clothes, the arrogance clung to him like expensive cologne. The type of man who never worried about the price of anything, who walked into rooms expecting to be the most important person there. Jake didn't move, didn't even let his expression shift as he took another slow sip of his drink. He'd seen this play out before. Women like Sienna, women who looked like they belonged to a world of yachts and penthouses, always chose the guy with money. And this guy? He knew it. He leaned in closer, flashing a smooth smile, his hand barely grazing Sienna's wrist as he spoke. Jake didn't hear what he said, but he could guess. Something clever, something rehearsed. A muscle tightened in Jake's jaw. He didn't know what pissed him off more, the fact that the guy was trying or the fact that Jake had no right to care. She wasn't his. She wasn't anyone's. But then, just as easily as she could have leaned into the conversation, just as effortlessly as she could have smiled and played along, she didn't. Sienna pulled back, subtle but firm. She said something, short, dismissive. The guy hesitated, clearly thrown off, before forcing a smirk and raising his hands in mock surrender. She didn't give him another second of her attention. Instead, she turned and looked right at Jake. His grip on the glass tightened. For a long second, neither of them moved. Then, without hesitation, she walked straight toward him. Jake's pulse ticked up, but he kept his expression steady, watching as she slid onto the bar stool beside him like the whole thing had meant nothing. "Something funny?" she asked, sipping her wine. Jake smirked, shaking his head. "Not funny, just unexpected." She tilted her head. "What is?" Jake glanced toward the guy still lingering on the patio, looking both confused and annoyed. Then he looked back at her. "You walking away?" Sienna's lips curved slightly, like she knew exactly what he was thinking. "Maybe you don't know me as well as you think." Jake chuckled, shaking his head. "Yeah, maybe I don't." But as she took another slow sip of her drink, looking completely at ease, He started to think maybe he wanted to. The night stretched wide above them, an endless black canvas dusted with stars. The kind of sky you could only see out here, where city lights didn't drown out the universe. A soft breeze rolled across the open field, rustling the tall grass, carrying the scent of earth and something deeper, something real. Jake set the picnic basket down on the flannel blanket, glancing up at Sienna as she looked around. No chandeliers, no linen tablecloths, just the quiet hum of crickets, the glow of fireflies, and the moonlight casting silver shadows across the landscape. "This is different," she admitted, folding her arms across her chest. Jake smirked, kneeling to pull out the food. "Good different?" Sienna lowered herself onto the blanket, brushing her fingers across the fabric before leaning back on her hands. "Let's just say no one's ever taken me somewhere like this before." Jake popped open a cold soda, handing it to her instead of the wine he figured she was used to. "Figured you'd say that." She took it with a small smile, tapping the can against his before taking a sip. "So what made you think of this?" Jake leaned back, stretching his legs out. "Figured I couldn't compete with what you're used to, so why bother trying?" Sienna let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. "You think I care about all that?" He gave her a knowing look. "Don't you?" She opened her mouth, ready to argue, but the truth sat heavy in her chest. Maybe at one point she had. Maybe for most of her life she thought love had to be grand gestures and extravagant displays. But here she was, sitting on a blanket in the middle of nowhere, drinking soda under the stars with a man who hadn't once tried to impress her. And she couldn't remember the last time she felt this, at peace. Jake pulled out 2 sandwiches, handing her one without fanfare. "Best I could do," Sienna smirked. "A gourmet meal, only the best." She took a bite, and for a moment they just sat there, side by side, the silence stretching between them, not uncomfortable, but easy. And that's when she realized it. This wasn't about grand gestures. It wasn't about wealth or status or proving anything. It was just them. No expectations. No pretense. Just falling. The words sat heavy on Sienna's tongue, pressing against the back of her throat, desperate to break free. She glanced at Jake, who sat beside her on the hood of his truck, arms resting on his knees, gaze fixed on the dark horizon. The quiet between them felt different tonight, thicker, heavier. The air buzzed with something unspoken, and for once, Sienna couldn't ignore it. Her fingers curled against the metal of the truck. "There's something I need to tell you, Jake." His head turned slightly, his blue eyes locking onto hers, steady, unreadable. Sienna swallowed, forcing herself to hold his gaze. This was it. The moment she had been putting off, the moment she had convinced herself could wait, until it couldn't anymore. She inhaled, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Just say it. Tell him who you are. Tell him that your real name isn't just Sienna. Tell him that you don't just pass through towns like this, that you don't belong here, that you—" The shrill ring of Jake's phone shattered the moment. He sighed, pulling it from his pocket, glancing at the screen. His jaw tensed. "Gotta take this," he muttered, sliding off the hood. Sienna exhaled, tension slipping through her fingers like sand as he stepped away, phone pressed to his ear. She should have been relieved. The conversation could wait. She could put it off for another day, but instead, all she felt was guilt. She didn't mean to eavesdrop, but Jake's voice dropped, low and tense. "Come on, Mike. Give me another week. You know I'm good for it." Silence. Then a clipped response on the other end. Jake's shoulders stiffened. "I get it. Yeah, I'll figure it out." Another pause. A sharp inhale. "Thanks." He hung up, running a hand through his hair before shoving the phone back into his pocket. His expression was unreadable, but Sienna didn't need to ask. She already knew. The garage. He was behind on rent. And suddenly, telling him the truth felt like the worst thing she could do, because if she told him now, if she admitted that she had the kind of money that could wipe out his problems in an instant, he'd never trust her again. So she said nothing, just like every time before. The words from Jake's phone call echoed in Sienna's head long after he had shoved his phone back into his pocket. "I'll figure it out." She knew that tone, knew the quiet way a person carried weight on their shoulders when they were used to doing everything alone. Jake hadn't said much after the call. He had forced a smirk, thrown out some casual remark about how life had a funny way of kicking you when you're already down, but Sienna saw through it. The garage was in trouble. Real trouble. She should have told him the truth right then and there. Should have admitted that money wasn't something she had to worry about, that she could pay off his landlord with the tap of a screen, make the problem disappear before sunrise. But she didn't. Because Jake would never accept it. She saw the way he carried himself, how he prided himself on hard work, how he'd rather struggle than take a handout. To him, money was earned, not given. Which meant she had only one option. She had to fix this without him knowing. That night she sat in her hotel room, staring at her laptop screen, fingers hovering over the keyboard. She could make one call, just one, and it would be done. The garage would be safe. But this wasn't like buying another business, another asset. This was Jake. Her chest tightened as she thought about what she was about to do. Was she crossing a line? The answer didn't matter. She hit send. The response was immediate. The landlord would get an anonymous deposit in the morning. No questions asked. It was done. Sienna closed her laptop, exhaling slowly. Jake would never know. He'd think he figured it out on his own. He'd never have to feel like she had swooped in to save him. And maybe, just maybe, he'd never find out just how much she was lying to him. Jake slammed the garage door shut with a heavy thud, the sound reverberating in the empty space. He stood there for a moment, his chest rising and falling, trying to calm the storm swirling inside him. The landlord had called that morning, his tone unexpectedly light, almost too pleasant. "I've decided to extend your lease, Jake. No need to worry about the payment this month, okay?" Jake had barely processed the words before his heart dropped into his stomach. He had been behind, way behind, and yet suddenly the pressure had lifted. No warning, no negotiation. Just a generous offer from a man who had never been anything but cold, always demanding more. Jake had walked into the garage, hands clenched, and the first thing he saw was Sienna standing by the workbench, examining a car part with a quiet focus. She had been there more often lately, though he hadn't questioned it. He liked having her around. She was easy to talk to. She made him laugh. But now he felt something gnawing at him. Something didn't add up. "Did you talk to him?" Jake asked, his voice low but carrying a hard edge. Sienna's head snapped up. "What?" "The landlord," Jake pressed, stepping closer. "Did you talk to him about my lease? About the rent?" Her face remained neutral, but there was a flicker in her eyes, just a flicker. It was enough to make his stomach tighten. I don't know what you're talking about, Jake." He clenched his fists, holding himself back. "Don't lie to me, Sienna." Her eyes dropped to the floor, her shoulders tensing. "Jake, I didn't—" He crossed the room in 2 strides, grabbing her wrist gently but firmly. "I need you to be honest with me." Her breath caught, and for a moment, it felt like the world stopped turning. He could see the hesitation in her eyes, the way her lips parted as if she were about to say something, but then the words never came. She opened her mouth, then closed it. "No, I didn't do anything." Her voice cracked just slightly at the end, and Jake's heart dropped. She was lying, he could tell, but the lie lingered in the air between them, thick and suffocating. Jake's grip on her wrist loosened, but the question burned in his mind. Why wouldn't she just tell him? "All right," he said quietly, releasing her, stepping back. His heart ached with a bitterness he couldn't shake. "But I'm not stupid, Sienna." She stood there, silent, staring at him, and for the first time since they'd met, he didn't know if he could trust her. The air between them felt charged, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. Jake stood across from Sienna in the garage, their eyes locked, both of them caught somewhere between what had been said and what hadn't. Sienna felt a familiar rush of guilt creeping up her spine, the weight of her lies. of the distance she'd put between them. But there was something else now, something that made it hard to breathe. The way Jake was looking at her, like he was trying to figure her out, but also like he was seeing something deeper, and for a moment she couldn't tell if he was angry, hurt, or just as confused as she was. "Why do you keep running from this?" Jake's voice was low, rough with emotion. His words hung in the air, a challenge she couldn't ignore. "Every time I try to get close, you pull away." Sienna opened her mouth to speak, to offer another excuse, but the words were stuck, lodged somewhere between her throat and her heart. She knew she wasn't being fair. She knew she should have told him the truth, but she couldn't, not yet. Not when everything she thought she understood about love felt like it was unraveling right before her eyes. Jake stepped closer, his movements slow but deliberate. "I don't get you, Sienna. I don't get why you won't let me in." Her breath caught as his gaze dropped to her lips for a fleeting moment, and the world seemed to stand still. She could feel the pull between them, the electricity crackling in the silence. And then, without another word, Jake's hand reached up, cupping her cheek gently, his thumb brushing across her skin in a way that felt both tender and desperate. Sienna's heart pounded in her chest, the heat between them rising until there was nothing left to do but close the distance. Before she knew it, his lips were on hers. It was fierce, unexpected, and it set her whole body on fire. There were no more words, no more doubts, just the feeling of him, of them, as if they were the only two people left in the world. The kiss deepened, and Sienna finally let go of the fear that had been holding her back. Everything about this felt real, raw, unfiltered. She pulled away for a breath, her chest rising and falling rapidly, her fingers still resting against his chest. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. The garage was quiet, save for the sound of their breaths mingling in the space between them. And for the first time in a long time, Sienna wasn't afraid. The sound of tires crunching over gravel broke the silence of the evening as Sienna's sleek black car pulled into the small parking lot of the garage. Jake had just finished up for the night, wiping down his tools, when he saw her through the dust-covered windows. For the first time in days, the knot in his chest loosened. She was here. But something was different this time. There was a new urgency in her step, something almost off. Jake wiped his hands on his jeans and walked toward her, ready to greet her the way he always did. But as he opened the door, he froze. Standing just behind Sienna, leaning against her car, was a tall man in a sharply tailored suit. He looked out of place in the quiet town, his expensive watch gleaming under the dim lights. And next to him, Sienna's assistant, Margot, looked nervous. Too nervous. "Jake?" Sienna's voice was light, almost too light. "I wasn't expecting you to be here." Margot's eyes flicked to him, and Jake saw her lips tighten, like she was trying to hold something back. He took a step forward, a bad feeling crawling up his spine. "Who's this?" he asked, his voice low. Sienna hesitated for a moment before giving him a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "This is my business partner." She glanced quickly at the man in the suit. "He's just here to tie up a few things." Jake nodded, his mind already racing, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He watched as the man shook Sienna's hand, his grip too firm, too deliberate, and then watched her quickly step away. It wasn't the way a woman acted with someone she'd been working with. It was more the way she acted with someone who had power over her. "Everything all right?" Jake asked, crossing his arms. Sienna paused, glancing at Margot, who was now looking at her phone, clearly avoiding eye contact with Jake. "Yeah, just some things to sort out." She smiled again, this time forced. "Don't worry about it." But Jake wasn't buying it, not anymore. The smile was all wrong. The tension in the air was suffocating. As they walked toward the door of the garage, Jake overheard the man in the suit say something. He didn't mean to hear it, but the words hit him like a punch to the gut. "Is everything set for the next move? Will he be taken care of once she signs the contract?" Jake froze, his heart skipping a beat. It felt like the ground had shifted beneath him. He turned, stepping into the shadows of the garage, trying to process what he had just heard. He didn't understand. It was like he had stepped into another world. Her world. It was all a lie. Sienna wasn't who she said she was. She had played him, just like all the others. His hands clenched into fists, anger bubbling up, burning hotter with every second. He had trusted her, and she had let him believe something that wasn't real. He didn't wait for her to come back inside. He didn't need to. He already knew what he had to do. The garage was silent, save for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Jake stood at the counter, his back to Sienna, as he stared out the grimy window, his hands braced on the worn wood. He could feel the anger burning in his chest, rising like a wave, unstoppable. The man's words echoed in his mind over and over again. Will he be taken care of once she signs the contract? He had heard it clearly, too clearly. And now, standing in front of her, he couldn't even look at her the same way. Sienna's voice broke the quiet, tentative. Jake, please, let me explain. Jake didn't move. He couldn't. The idea of trusting her, of believing in her, it felt like a distant memory. How could he have been so blind? Explain? His voice was rough, bitter. He finally turned, meeting her gaze. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't see the woman he'd grown close to. He saw someone else, someone who had used him. Was I just some experiment to you? Sienna flinched, her lips parting, as if she was about to speak, but the words seemed to die in her throat. Jake stepped back, shaking his head. The anger, the confusion, it was overwhelming. You really think I'm stupid, don't you? I trusted you. I never meant for it to happen this way, Sienna said, stepping towards him, her voice shaking. Jake, you have to understand. No, he snapped, his hands tightening into fists. You don't get it. You lied to me. You told me everything was real, that we were real. His eyes burned, and for a moment he thought he might lose control. I was just another project for you, wasn't I? Another man you could use to prove something? Sienna recoiled, as though his words had physically struck her. No, that's not what this is. Then what is it, Sienna? Jake demanded, his voice louder now, raw with emotion. What the hell is it? Because all I see is a woman who wanted something she couldn't get from her world, so she found a way to make me fit into her little experiment. He saw the hurt flash across her face, and for a second he almost couldn't take it. But then the rage came back, stronger than ever. He took a step back, shaking his head. I can't do this. I can't be a part of whatever game you're playing. Sienna reached for him, but he stepped away, the distance between them suddenly feeling like an entire ocean. Jake, please. I'm done, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. He turned and walked toward the door, not looking back, not trusting himself too. Behind him, Sienna stood motionless, the weight of everything crashing down around her. She had lost him. And in that moment she knew the dream had shattered. The sun was setting as Sienna packed her things, each movement mechanical, the weight of the past few days dragging her down. The small hotel room felt suffocating now, each corner filled with the echoes of things unsaid, of trust broken, and love that had never stood a chance. She didn't know why it had taken her so long to leave. Maybe it was the hope that things would somehow fix themselves, that Jake would understand, that he would see the truth. But now, standing in the quiet of the room, there was no hope left. Jake had made it clear. She had made it clear. There was nothing left between them but lies, and now she had to leave before it consumed her completely. The suitcase snapped shut with a soft click, and for the first time in days she allowed herself to breathe. She didn't look back as she pulled her bag toward the door. It would have been too painful. She walked to the car, her steps slow, like the ground was pulling her under. This was the end. She knew it deep down, but that didn't make it hurt any less. As she slid into the driver's seat, her phone buzzed, a message lighting up the screen. Jake! His name flashing there like a punch to her gut. She stared at it for a long moment, wondering if she should read it, But she already knew what it would say. She already knew the words. She couldn't bear it. With a shaky breath, she hit delete and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. There was nothing left to say. Jake wasn't coming after her. He hadn't tried to stop her. He hadn't even asked her to stay, and that hurt more than anything. As the engine hummed to life, Sienna pulled out of the parking lot, leaving the small town behind, leaving Jake behind. She drove without direction, the road stretching out in front of her, just like her life, empty, uncertain. The further she went, the more it felt like she was running from something that had never been real in the first place. Somewhere deep inside, she knew this was the right choice. But her heart ached with every mile. Jake had been the one real thing she'd ever known, and now she was leaving him. Forever? Jake sat in the garage, the familiar hum of machines and the smell of grease filling the air, but it all felt hollow now. The weight of silence pressed down on him like a constant aching reminder of what he had lost. His hands moved mechanically as he wiped down the counter, running a rag over the same spot for the third time, but nothing felt right. Not anymore. He could still see her, Sienna, standing there looking at him with those eyes full of confusion and hurt. He had pushed her away, not out of anger, but out of pride, stubbornness. He had convinced himself that she was just like every other person who had come into his life, looking for something he couldn't give. But he'd been wrong. It wasn't about the money. He had spent so much time trying to convince himself that her wealth was the issue, that she was just another person playing a game he couldn't win. But it wasn't about her wealth. It was about her. The way she laughed, the way she cared about the little things, the way she made him feel like he wasn't just some mechanic in a small town. She had made him feel seen in a way no one ever had before. And now she was gone. Jake leaned against the workbench, his fingers gripping the edge as if holding on to something that was slipping through his hands. The echo of her absence filled the room, a silence that felt too loud. She had left, and he hadn't stopped her. He hadn't even tried. He had let her walk away, believing that she was just another person who would leave once the truth was out. But he knew now. The truth wasn't about money. It wasn't about status. It had never been about any of that. He had loved her for who she was, for the quiet way she listened when he spoke, for the way she made him believe that he could be more than just the guy fixing cars. She had been the first person to see him, really see him, and he had pushed her away. He ran a hand through his hair, his breath coming out in a ragged sigh. He had lost her, and now he didn't know if he'd ever be able to fix that. Jake was halfway through fixing a car when he heard the unmistakable sound of tires crunching on gravel. His body tensed instinctively, but he didn't look up. He couldn't, not after everything, not after the way he'd let her go without a second thought. He knew who it was before the engine even cut off. Sienna. The familiar ache in his chest flared up again, and his hand stilled over the car's engine. The heat of the garage felt suffocating now, thick with the weight of her presence. He had been living without her, but it didn't mean the silence had gotten any easier to bear. Her footsteps approached the door, and Jake clenched his jaw, staring down at the grease-streaked metal in front of him. The sound of her voice made the blood in his veins freeze. Jake. Her voice was softer than he remembered, like it had been worn down by the distance between them. She wasn't angry, wasn't demanding anything. She was vulnerable, and that made it harder to breathe. He didn't turn around. "I don't need your money, Sienna," he said, his voice strained. The words came out harder than he intended, but he couldn't help it. It was the only defense he had left, the only thing that kept him from falling apart in front of her. "I'm not here for your money," she replied, her voice wavering just enough to make him pause. "I never was." Jake stiffened, feeling the weight of her words sink in. He hadn't expected that. He had built this wall, this belief that it was all about the wealth, the power she wielded. And now she was telling him, again, that it wasn't. She stepped closer, her shadow falling across him, but he didn't move. "What do you want from me, Sienna?" The question felt raw, desperate, like a last-ditch attempt to protect himself from the truth. "I want to give you something real," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to give you my heart, Jake, not my money. My heart." Her words lingered in the air, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was thick, heavy, with everything that had passed between them, everything they had lost. Jake squeezed his eyes shut, trying to fight back the wave of emotion threatening to drown him. She didn't get it. She couldn't. He had trusted her once, and she had broken that trust. "I don't know if I can believe that anymore," he muttered, his voice breaking despite his best efforts. She reached out, a soft touch on his shoulder that made him flinch. "Jake, I'm sorry. I didn't know how to fix what I broke, but I'm here now." For the first time in what felt like forever, Jake finally turned to face her. His heart was pounding, his mind a mess of confusion, anger, and something else, something dangerous. "I'm sorry, too," he whispered, his eyes searching hers, wanting to believe, wanting to forgive. But was it too late? The sun was barely rising, casting a faint pink glow across the town as Jake wiped the last of the grease from his hands. He had spent the whole morning working on a truck that had been on the fritz for weeks. His mind wasn't really on the job, though. It hadn't been on anything since Sienna walked back into his life. The feeling of her touch, of her words, still lingered with him, like a pulse he couldn't escape. She had come back, told him she wasn't there for his money, but how could he trust her? After everything? As he bent to grab another tool from the workbench, the door to the garage opened and Sienna stepped inside. She was wearing something simple, jeans, a loose shirt, her hair pulled back. Nothing like the designer clothes she used to wear, but even in something so ordinary, she still seemed to shine. She caught his gaze instantly, and for a moment it felt like time had stopped. "Jake," she said softly, her voice hesitant but firm. He straightened up, wiping his hands again, avoiding her eyes. He couldn't look at her, not when the weight of his pride felt so heavy. "What is it?" he asked, his voice guarded. She stepped closer, her presence filling the small space between them. "I've made a decision," she began, and Jake's heart stuttered in his chest. "I'm stepping away from the company." Jake's brow furrowed, disbelief creeping up his spine. "What are you talking about?" Sienna took a breath, as if she were gathering courage to say something she knew would change everything. "I'm not going to be the CEO anymore. I'm leaving the company. I've made my choice, Jake. I choose you. Not the wealth. Not the life I was living. You." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. For a second he couldn't breathe, couldn't process what she was saying. This was it, the final test. She was giving up everything for him, for them. And yet, his heart couldn't catch up with his mind. "You don't have to do that," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to leave all that behind for me." She stepped forward again, her hand reaching out, brushing against his. "I'm not leaving it behind for you, Jake. I'm leaving it behind for me, because I finally realized I don't need it. I need you." His heart cracked wide open, the weight of her words sinking in. But a part of him, the part that had been burned so many times before, wanted to hold back, to keep his pride intact. He didn't want to need her, didn't want to admit how much he had fallen for her. But as her eyes held his, vulnerable and raw, something shifted inside him. He felt the barriers he had built begin to crumble. "I'm not going anywhere," Jake whispered, his hand covering hers. For the first time in a long time, he let go of the fear that had held him captive for so long. And just like that, they were both free. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the quiet garage. As Jake leaned against the workbench, his hands still greasy from a long day's work. His mind, though, was far from the engine he'd been tinkering with. It was on her, Sienna. The past few days had felt like a whirlwind, her decision to walk away from her life, from her company, just to be with him. The words kept echoing in his mind. "I choose you." But he couldn't deny the fear that gripped him every time he thought about it. She had so much, more than he could ever offer. It was too much for someone like him. She could leave any time. The doubts gnawed at him, the old fears creeping back in like shadows. Jake glanced up and saw her standing in the doorway, her eyes soft but determined. She had come back again, and every time she did it was harder to ignore the pull between them. "You're still here," she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. He nodded, wiping his hands on the rag, not sure what to say. The silence stretched between them, the weight of everything unsaid hanging heavy in the air. Then she stepped inside, closing the door softly behind her. Jake. The way she said his name, so gentle, so full of understanding, did something to him. The walls he had built around himself started to crack. She wasn't going anywhere. And suddenly, he knew, he couldn't keep lying to himself anymore. He took a step toward her, his heart hammering in his chest. "You don't get it, do you?" His voice was low, rough. "I've been scared, Sienna, scared of what you want, what you need. I kept thinking I couldn't give you what you're used to, what you deserve. But that doesn't matter anymore." Her brow furrowed, but he didn't let her speak. "I don't care who you are, Sienna," Jake said, his voice raw now, the words tumbling out of him. "I don't care about your money or your name or your company. All I care about is that you're here, and you're mine." Her breath caught, her eyes wide with something he couldn't read. He reached for her hand, taking it in his. "I'm not letting you go again. I don't care about any of that other shit. I want you. All of you." She didn't speak at first, but then slowly she stepped closer, and in that moment he knew that she was there for him, just as he was there for her. No more pretending, no more holding back. Sienna's hand cupped his cheek, her touch soft but steady. And when she spoke, it was with a quiet certainty. "I've always been yours, Jake." And in the stillness that followed, as she closed the distance between them, it felt like everything else had fallen away. The world, the past, the fear, nothing mattered but this moment, and the love they had finally given each other. The sun had barely started to set when Jake pulled the tarp off the car, the soft rustling of the fabric cutting through the still air. He wiped his hands on his jeans, his fingers still stained with grease from a long day's work. This was the moment. He'd spent weeks thinking about it, wondering if it was enough, if she would understand. The car, an old rusted Ford, hadn't been touched in years. It had been sitting in the back of the garage, its paint chipped and faded, the tires cracked and worn. To anyone else, it was just a project, another vehicle to be fixed and sold. But to him, it was something more. It was his gift to her, a piece of himself he could give without the luxury of diamonds or flashy gestures. This was real. This was meaningful. Sienna stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable as she watched him. She didn't say anything at first, just took in the sight of the car, the faded blue of the exterior barely visible beneath the layers of dust and rust. Her eyes shifted to him, confusion flickering across her face. "Jake," she said softly, her voice hesitant. "What is this?" He stepped aside, motioning toward the car. "I've been fixing it up for you. I know it's not much, but it's something I thought you might like." Sienna took a step forward, her gaze never leaving the car. She ran a finger along the cracked hood, her touch gentle, almost reverent. The silence stretched between them, and for a moment Jake wondered if she'd be disappointed. Wondered if this wasn't enough, if she'd expect something more. But then she turned to him, her eyes softer than he'd ever seen them, a flicker of something in her gaze that made his heart skip. "You really did this for me?" Jake nodded, his throat tightening. "I didn't have anything else to give you. But this is me. This is what I can offer." She reached out, her fingers brushing his hand. Her voice barely above a whisper, she said, "It's perfect, Jake." And then, without warning, she pulled him close, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that spoke volumes, no words, just the quiet understanding that passed between them. "I never needed a fancy ring," she murmured against his lips, her hand resting over his heart. "I just needed you." Jake's heart swelled, the weight of everything he had been holding back crashing down. He wasn't rich, he didn't have the grand gestures, but he had her, and this simple, imperfect car, was the best thing he could give her, and for the first time in his life, he felt like he was enough. The morning air was crisp, the sun low in the sky, casting soft golden light over the small town. It was the kind of morning that felt timeless, quiet, peaceful, as if the world had paused just for a moment to give them a chance to breathe. Sienna stood in the small chapel, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the simple white dress she'd found at a local boutique. There were no extravagant lace designs, no intricate beads or silks, just something simple, something real. The dress was a reflection of the life she and Jake had built together. No frills, no pretenses, just them. The chapel was humble, the pews worn with age, but it was perfect. The sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the worn wooden floors. The room was filled with the faint scent of flowers, the only decoration a few wild blooms that Sienna had picked from the garden outside. Jake stood at the front, waiting, his hands fidgeting with the cuffs of his shirt. He wasn't used to this kind of thing. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, to standing in front of people with all eyes on him. But there was no doubt in his mind. This was where he belonged, standing here in this small town, with her. When Sienna entered the chapel, their eyes met, and for a moment, everything else faded. The world outside, the noise, the doubts, they all disappeared. All that mattered was the two of them, standing there in the quiet of the chapel, hearts beating in time with one another. As she walked down the aisle, Jake's breath caught. She was more beautiful than he could have ever imagined, but it wasn't just the way she looked. It was the way she made him feel, like he was exactly where he needed to be. The ceremony was simple, no grand speeches or rehearsed vows, just the exchange of words that held so much weight between them, words that meant more than any elaborate ceremony ever could. "I take you, Sienna, for everything you are," Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. "For all the moments, the quiet ones and the loud ones, for everything that comes with you. I choose you every day." Sienna smiled, her eyes wet with tears she hadn't expected to fall. "I take you, Jake, not because of what you have or what you can give me, but because of who you are. You're home to me. I've never felt more real than when I'm with you." When they exchanged rings, there were no grand gestures, no show of wealth, just a simple, heartfelt promise between two people who had learned that sometimes the best things in life weren't the ones you could buy. They were the ones you worked for. As they walked out of the chapel hand in hand, the small town gathered outside to cheer them on, clapping and whistling as they stepped into the sunlight. No fancy reception, no extravagant celebrations, just a small town wedding, their wedding, a perfect beginning to the rest of their simple, real life together. The grand opening of the new shop was a simple affair. No balloons, no oversized signs, just a few close friends and the steady hum of anticipation in the air. Jake stood by the counter, watching the customers trickle in, each of them exchanging smiles and greetings as they checked out the new space. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a modest building tucked at the edge of town, the kind of place you'd drive past without a second thought. But it was theirs, and that was enough. Sienna stood beside him, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, her sleeves rolled up, as she flipped through a stack of paperwork. The sharp lines of her tailored jacket contrasted with the grease stains on her jeans, but Jake, he had always found something comforting in the way she looked, strong, capable, real. He had never imagined a life where she wasn't a part of it, but now, seeing her here, working alongside him in a place they'd both created from nothing, felt like a dream come true. "Do you think it's enough?" she asked, glancing over at him, a worried look on her face as she tapped her pen against the desk. Jake didn't have to think about it. He walked over and put his hand on hers, squeezing it gently. "It's more than enough," he said, his voice steady, confident. "We're doing this together, and that's all that matters." She smiled softly, but Jake could see the flicker of doubt in her eyes. She wasn't used to the idea of starting from scratch, of building something so personal, so real. But that's what this was. They weren't relying on anything but each other. Jake's skills as a mechanic, Sienna's knowledge of business, and the strength of the love they'd built, those were the only things that mattered. The first customer walked in, a familiar face from the old garage, and Jake felt a wave of pride wash over him. "Hey, it's good to see you," he greeted, shaking the man's hand. He glanced over at Sienna, who was already handling the paperwork, her voice calm and professional. They made a great team. This was their new beginning. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be days when they'd question if it was worth it, when the bills piled up, and the challenges seemed insurmountable. But Jake knew one thing for sure. This was where they were meant to be, and he wasn't going to let anything take that away from them. Together, they were building more than just an auto shop. They were building a life. And for the first time in a long time, Jake felt certain about the future. The days had blurred together in the weeks since they opened the shop, the grind of early mornings and late nights starting to take its toll. But Jake didn't mind the exhaustion. It was different this time. This wasn't the same kind of struggle. This was theirs. And that made it worth every long hour. Sienna was beside him, just as she had promised she would be. They were in the shop together, solving problems side by side, their movements in sync, their goals aligned. But even as the business began to grow, Jake couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was something more he needed to understand. It was a quiet evening when it hit him. They were sitting in the back of the shop, taking a brief break after a long day of work. The hum of the lights overhead was the only sound in the otherwise still space. Sienna had just handed him a coffee, her hand still warm from the cup. She sat down across from him, her tired eyes meeting his with that familiar, soft smile. "I was thinking," she said quietly, "about how far we've come, from where we were to here. It's more than I ever imagined." Jake leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, you know? Like I don't deserve all this." Sienna's gaze softened, her voice barely above a whisper. "You do deserve it, Jake. You've worked for everything we have here, not just the shop, but the life we're building." He shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "I don't know. We've come a long way, but I keep wondering if it's enough. I've never had much to offer. I never thought I could give you anything." Sienna's hand reached across the table, gently covering his. "The thing is, Jake," she said, her eyes never leaving his, "you've given me everything I ever needed. Not money, not fancy things, but your time, your honesty, your trust. That's what matters." Jake felt something inside him shift, like a weight had been lifted. He realized then that he had been measuring his worth by what he could give her, by what he could show her. But what she wanted wasn't his paycheck or his ability to fix things. It was him, all of him. The truth settled into his chest, warm and comforting. Love, honesty, trust. They were the true riches in life. Not the things you could buy or the status you could achieve, but the people you chose to be with and the connections you built. "I guess we already have everything we need," Jake said softly, squeezing her hand. Sienna smiled, her eyes sparkling with a tenderness that took his breath away. "We do," she agreed, "and I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world." And in that moment, Jake understood. He didn't need to keep proving his worth or chasing things that didn't matter. He already had the only wealth that truly counted, and it was enough. The sound of the engine hummed steadily beneath them, the rhythm of the tires on the road, a comforting backdrop to the silence in the car. The sun was dipping low on the horizon, casting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. It was one of those moments that felt almost too perfect, too beautiful to be real. but it was. Sienna sat beside Jake, her head resting against the window, her eyes focused on the fading light. She could feel the warmth of the day still in the air, the kind of warmth that lingered long after the sun had set. She didn't know when the shift had happened, when everything had gone from uncertain, from filled with fear and doubt, to this, to them, together. Jake's hand rested casually on the steering wheel, his fingers lightly gripping it, but the tension had gone from his posture. He had always carried the weight of the world on his shoulders, but now he seemed lighter. And for the first time in a long time, she felt it too. They had come a long way, from strangers to friends, from friends to something deeper. Through the struggles, the mistakes, and the moments when they almost lost each other, they had found something real. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was theirs. Jake glanced over at her, his eyes lingering for a second longer than usual. She smiled, the soft curve of her lips something more genuine than it had been in months. "You know," Jake said, breaking the silence, his voice quiet but certain, "I never thought I'd be driving down a road like this with someone like you beside me." Sienna's heart fluttered in her chest, the words sinking in deeper than she expected. "And what does someone like me look like?" she asked softly, her gaze meeting his. Jake shrugged, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Someone who makes everything else feel right, even when it's all wrong." Sienna laughed lightly, her fingers brushing against his as she reached for the radio. The song that came on was soft, familiar, a melody that seemed to fit the moment perfectly. The windows were down, the breeze rushing through, carrying with it the scent of the earth and the promise of the road ahead. Together they were driving into the sunset, into whatever came next. The future was uncertain, but for the first time they both knew something for sure. They didn't have to face it alone. Jake's grip tightened on the wheel, but it wasn't out of fear anymore. It was because they were both holding on to something that was real. And as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind them, the only thing left was the journey they would take together.